The lives of people in poverty are defined by limited access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity, in which creates a cycle of hardship that can only be broken through systemic policy changes and targeted community support. Firstly, you need to understand what being in poverty looks like in America. What that looks like would be this image here. Here we have a human being sleeping outside with a written-on piece of cardboard that says, "Anything helps, God bless, thanks." If you haven't noticed already, this man is homeless, has no money, and is on the streets of America begging for anything that will help him make it through the day. Though this is what poverty generally looks like to people, it can also look a bit differently. Nice house, right? Yeah, I admit it is on the outside, but never judge a book by its cover. Although this is a decent home internally, there is a mother with 5 children who is struggling to pay rent here, afford cable TV, the water bill, you name it. Although her house looks in order, they are struggling. They actually don't know what they're going to eat tonight, or when they're getting new school clothes, if any. That being said, the sad truth about this is that one of, if not all, these children going into school will either be bullied by their peers, have depression, or even anger issues. Not because that's their fate, but because they are growing up in a struggling environment, and when they go to school where these other kids who aren't struggling like them see they're different in that way, it becomes a sort of installation. Now, what causes poverty, you might ask? Well, many factors can cause poverty, such as living where there's high crime rate, bad financial decisions, forced to work a job making minimum wage, and more. With a high crime rate, places like 63rd Street in Chicago is filled with people on the poverty line, because the neighborhood is coded into it by its environment. 63rd Street is known to be extremely gang-related. What comes with being gang-related is illegal drug activities, gang initiations at a young age, people leaving this earth at even younger ages. All because they are stuck in these environments held down by environmental factors. For example, little Vaughn wants to be a football player when he grows up, but because his mom can't afford him going way across town to a school that has a good football program, he's stuck walking down the crime-coded neighborhood to a school with no football program, just education. Now you might think, oh well, education is key, he can be book smart, and be a doctor. Unfortunately for little Vaughn, he has already been enrolled in a life of crime by Big Pac, who every time little Vaughn is on the way home asks him to go in the store and borrow some percent bottle, if you know what I mean. So not only is borrowing percent bottles being normalized to little Vaughn, he'll grow up always knowing and hanging with Big Pac because from a young age he thinks they're friends. But let's just say that doesn't happen, and he goes to study to become a doctor. Little Vaughn isn't getting the proper learning experience because, as I've said before, he and his 4 siblings are likely to be picked on for not having much. So now little Vaughn has anger issues and is fighting every day at school and gets expelled. Now where will he go to school? Is he destined to keep getting expelled because he has anger issues? No, he's going to be outside more with Big Pac now that school isn't taking out 8 hours of his day, and he will potentially grow up into a life of crime. Little Vaughn is now a teen fully implemented into Big Pac's gang affiliation. He does everything Big Pac does as his right-hand man. One day Big Pac asks little Vaughn to go on a run, to which little Vaughn agrees. This time little Vaughn knows what borrowing from the store means, but he still does it anyway. He does the usual get in and get out, but suddenly he hears freeze. The cops caught him this time and Big Pac sped off and left him. But little Vaughn isn't going down easy. He reaches into his waistband, and what is followed with that is multiple popping sounds. Little Vaughn is now on the way to the hospital in critical condition. By God's grace he ends up making it through. Though of course faced with criminal charges, his bail is set at $5,000. But little Vaughn's mother doesn't have that kind of money, so now little Vaughn is stuck in jail. That's not all though, little Vaughn also accumulated hospital offers that come out to $15,000. Oh wait, he has insurance, right? No, he does not, so now little Vaughn is locked up in jail and owes the hospital $15,000 in service fees. Could all of this have been prevented? The answer is yes. But how, drill sergeant? I'll tell you. So one of the reasons little Vaughn was in this predicament was because he was growing up in rough neighborhood with no choice on where to go. Well, that's not his fault, but neither is it his mother's because she wasn't making enough to send him to another school, or relocate out the hood. Well, then who's to blame? Well, in my opinion, it would be the federal government. Why, you might ask? Because had the federal government been raising minimum wage instead of keeping it complacent since 2009, maybe little Vaughn's mom would had enough money to stay in a better area than 63rd Street. In conclusion, poverty is a very scary and real subject in America, and if not tended to, many